Hello again, baseball romantics. Jason here with you, and we have another special bonus episode coming at you. A fascinating look at Cooperstown and the Hall of Fame and just general baseball discussion. We've got Mark Kolier, who has a podcast with his son Gordon called Almost Cooperstown. And basically, the description they have here is they're a father and son who love to talk and argue about baseball. That sounds like me and my son as well. Baseball is a professional sport. It has the longest history, so there's a lot to talk about. I completely agree. They launched Almost Cooperstown, noting that baseball contains a long history of players that, for whatever reasons, have been shunned by the electors of the Hall of Fame. Consequently, there are many almost players still waiting for their turn at induction, with less than 1.4% of the now more than 23,000 players. We feel there should be more players included. So that's a fascinating topic. We're going to dive into that. But Mark, welcome. Appreciate you coming on. And just tell us a little bit about yourself, your son, and how you guys came about creating this podcast.
Thank you, Jason, and I'm happy to be a part of Romantic About Baseball. I like the title, and I know where it came from. And when I mentioned it to my wife, who was our producer, and she said, "Well, Romantic About Baseball are there women involved?" And and I said, "No, no, you don't understand." And so I like the tact you guys have taken, and it's sort of the same that we've taken. Like we're fans first and foremost, and although we'd love to have more access to things that real media people get. We have limited access. We get a couple of nuggets here and there. We get a player or we get an official or other people that come on the podcast, but there's no. And so that we try to live in that. We are fans first. We feel what other fans are feeling, and basically our podcast is two guys talking about baseball, just like you guys do on your podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds exactly what we're trying to do. And yeah, limited access is a good way to put that.
Yeah,
we've been fortunate enough to interview Greg Pryor, former big leaguer, was on the '85 Royals. Xavier Scruggs recently, but yeah, the whole premise of Romantic About Baseball was to connect with fans of other teams. For me, limited to you're in an echo chamber with your own fan group most of the time, right? So creating the page was a way to connect with fans. Like it's awesome to talk to Mets fans. Believe it or not, as a Braves fan, we love talking to Mets fans, Phillies fans. I've met so many great people. My producer is a big Phillies fan. He's an awesome guy. So, yeah, absolutely, man. So, tell me more about this concept that you guys came up with that there aren't enough players in the Hall of Fame, and what was your impetus for coming up with that? Like, was there a particular player that kind of sticks in your craw that is not in the Hall of Fame?
Well, there are a lot of players that we think should be in the Hall of Fame that were overlooked for one reason or another, and there are also, without being reductive, I guess is the word I'd like to use. There are people in the Hall of Fame that we did a podcast and I've written about. Okay, players that we would take out of the Hall of Fame if we had to. We don't really think that's the way to go.
Yeah.
Removing the guys that people don't like, and the Harold Baineses, and you can go back to Lil Poison, Lloyd Wayner, who
Yeah.
only got in because his brother was Big Poison and everybody knew the name. So that's not going to make the Hall of Fame better. And you're right. When you mentioned the 1.4%, baseball has the smallest percentage of its players in the Hall of Fame of any other sport. So we put out there that 36 players we'd put in the Hall of Fame was one of the things we talked about. And the point was, it wouldn't really change things that much. It doesn't ruin the Hall of Fame to have more people in there. It's just how you want to talk about these people. So the podcast was born out of a couple things. One, we were having a conversation with some friends, and the idea was that players like Ty Cobb, and way back when, probably had better averages in the seventh, eighth, and ninth inning than they did in the first six, was our premise, because they were facing tired pitchers who pitched the whole game. So, okay. So when we went to uncover that, we found out, you know what? That's really not the case. Hank Aaron and all these guys, they were great hitters in the first inning. They were great hitters in the sixth inning. They were great hitters in the ninth inning. So it
Yeah.
didn't project out the way that we thought, but it got us thinking about how players, have their roles have changed, and the pitcher roles have changed. That impacts their ability to get into the Hall of Fame, because it's harder for Mike Trout than it is for Ty Cobb than it was for Ty
Absolutely.
Cobb.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
And
that's a great, and kind of jumping off of that too. Do you think? And I saw you guys had an episode where you talked about the 3,000 hits mark, and maybe does 2,500 now become kind of the standard? Could we apply that to a lot of the metrics, like the 300 wins for a pitcher? To your point, will we ever see another pitcher reach 300 wins? Do you think maybe the standards there? And when we say lowered, I don't mean lowered in the sense that we're letting people in that shouldn't be there, but just the game has changed so much. To your point, don't you think maybe that those numbers have to be looked at a little differently?
Well, and so Jason, I think we look at things the same way. Like I've adopted and embraced statistics, but you can go crazy with some of the statistics that are out there that you can get into with Statcast and Baseball Savant and Baseball Reference on all the odds and Fangraphs.
Yeah,
So the idea is that, well, we have to be able to evaluate what we saw, and that guy looked like a Hall of Famer to me, or that guy didn't look like that still counts, I think, for people, instead of, well, let's look at the metrics. And so he didn't get, 3,000 hits. He doesn't make it because he fell short of that. That would have been the one thing that put him over. I don't think that's fair.
yeah,
And I think that you're right that 2,500 strikeouts also might be. Chris Sale just had that happen, the fastest in baseball history ever to achieve 2,500 strikeouts. Is Chris Sale a Hall of Famer? Look, I'm a Met fan. He played for the Red Sox and the Braves and the White Sox, and you're darn right, Chris Sale is a Hall of Famer. Because I think when you evaluate under today's metrics, he checks all the boxes.
yeah. I think that's a great point. He's going to be another fascinating discussion in several years when that career is over with. One that's close to my heart. And I guess I have to ask you if he was on your list, but and he's kind of a good example of the metrics because he hit 399 home runs, and I've heard people say, man, if he got that one more, and it's Dale Murphy. And growing up as a kid of the '80s, Murphy's always been a hot topic among people discussing this subject. What are your thoughts on the Murph?
Really like Dale Murphy. Not enough people know that he started as a catcher. And by the way, had he done what he did as a catcher through his career,
Oh yeah,
he'd be maybe the greatest catcher of all time with the way that he hit. But he had the misfortune of playing for some lousy Braves teams back in the early '80s, which really hurt his candidacy. And I think there are, the other way it can happen. You can also be a non-clutch player and play for a good team. And Steve Garvey has been bypassed for years
right.
because, and I lived in LA at the time. He always seemed like a guy who went 4 for 4 in a 16-2 Dodger win. Like, did it really matter? Well, Murphy, was the best player in the National League consecutive years. And so his Hall of Fame candidacy is legitimate to me. And the 399 home runs, that 400 shouldn't have put him over or not. He should be in already. Well, Al Kaline made it with 399. So,
Yeah,
it doesn't
good
stop any.
point. Yeah, good point. Yeah, I just had to ask because yeah, that's always been I want him to get in. I can understand the other side of the argument, but there's a sentimental spot there for the Murph. Who is your number one snub? Like the one guy that you think is the most egregious that's left out right now?
I don't know if I've ever put it in the number one. If I can hedge a little, I started thinking Jim Edmonds was that guy years ago, and Kenny Lofton.
Yeah,
Those two guys, I would probably put them neck and neck. Lou Whitaker has been a guy that I really felt, gee, if you look at his stats in Whitaker, actually is better than Trammell in a lot. And so how did Trammell make it? Just because he played shortstop? Are we going to give that much deference to playing
right.
that position over second base? So I'm not sure who amongst those three as hitters I would put in there. And then of course you take out all of the I'm taking out all of the steroid guys and all of that kind of stuff because personally and I think that those folks should be in because we don't know what the other guys were doing at the
Right.
time. And until baseball legislated, and had a policy in there that here's how we're going to handle this stuff. And since that time, I think it's been pretty good. I think Robinson Cano would probably be a first ballot Hall of Famer, but because of what happened, some of his stats fall a little short because he's been suspended for 250, 300 games. That lack of numbers didn't help him in his
Right.
case, considering he has to deal with the other stuff.
Oh, that's a great point. I'd love to come back to Kenny Lofton. He's one that I grew up watching, and I wonder sometimes if the way he had to change teams throughout his career repeatedly somehow hurts that because numbers wise, I feel like he's right there. And to me, he's one of the bigger snubs. But to your point, and of course, the steroid question was on my list here to ask about your thoughts on that. I've changed my opinion a lot over the years. I was a vehement anti steroid guy when I was younger. And now I'm like, we have to tell the full story of baseball regardless. And as long as that story is told on the plaque or in the Hall of Fame in
Yep.
some way, they should be in. You can't tell the story of baseball without Barry Bonds, Roger Clemens, Robinson Cano, Rafael Palmeiro. These guys, to your point, we don't know who was and wasn't, right? And so I think it's only fair that they get in. And I think eventually they will. I think this has been their punishment in some way. I don't know how long it'll take, but I do think they'll get there. Um, what are your thoughts in that kind of along those lines? What are your thoughts about Pete Rose? Got to ask that
Um,
question.
that's and it's funny. We interviewed Keith O'Brien, who wrote the book Charlie Hustle,
Yeah.
and then after that, I was in a back and forth conversation with Doug Lanville, the former Philly and Cub, and Doug has his own. Obviously, he does a podcast on Starkville with Jason Stark, and he also does Sunday Night Baseball. And I had proposed that, said, well, what would Pete Rose's plaque look like? And he thought that was a really good idea. So I endeavored to write, I think, 3 or 4 different plaques for Pete Rose in the
Nice.
Hall of Fame. And one of them was like the standard, like you go to Chat GPT and this is what it would say. I'm like, well, that's kind of boring and all that. And so then you have one that's a little more truthful. And then you have one that I wrote that wasn't so nice, but it basically told the story. And so, yeah, I think Pete Rose should be in the Hall of Fame. How do you have a Hall of Fame without the guy who has the most hits? And as tell the story, the guy was an inveterate gambler. He was not a good human. I
Right.
mean, all that's true, but to go to the Hall of Fame, go, so who has the most hits? Oh yeah, we don't have him here.
Right.
Really?
Yeah. The number one goal of baseball, I believe, is to get a hit, right? Get on base. And he was pretty
Yeah.
good at that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So and the other guys, it's the same thing. You don't know, like I said, who's doing it and who's not. And even if I don't like the player, I'm not a Roger Clemens fan, certainly, for a lot of reasons. That's not
Yeah,
just being a Met fan.
absolutely.
But and Schilling for different reasons. So those guys are Hall of Fame players. Between the lines, they were the best that ever played. And so I want baseball to at least represent, and then it would be bold for them. It's a museum, right, Jason? It's not a shrine. People
Right.
want to call it
Right.
a shrine, but it's not a
Yeah.
shrine. It's a museum.
Yeah, when I go, I desperately want to get to the Negro League Museum
Me
in
too.
Kansas City, and that it's going to tell the story, right? It's going to tell those players' stories, and the Baseball Hall of Fame should do the same thing, tell the story. And it's not as if there aren't already some shady characters in the Hall of Fame, right? I mean, Ty Cobb, you mentioned earlier, was not known as a great guy, right? Cap Anson has some issues. We could name a lot, right? So yes, there's a character clause there, but I think we've taken that too far. To your point, they've created a shrine instead of a museum. Really good point. So you guys are. Let's transition a little bit to maybe the current game. You guys are Mets fans. You and your son, right? Both Mets
Yeah, and
fans.
the Braves are beating the snot out of us as Met fans the
You know
past
what?
couple
This is
nights.
a temporary thing. I feel like the Braves had such a disappointing season, and the Mets to this point have had a really good season. So really, I just want to get your thoughts on the Mets season, and you can take into account obviously the last 2 games, but overall, are you surprised where they're at and how they've been? Are you hopeful for the rest of the season? Like just your general thoughts on the Mets in
Sure.
2025.
Sure. Well, and I have great respect for the Braves because 14 division championships is something that no Met fan can deny, right? And so, you look at the Braves and they are always, the team that is the Voldemort for the Mets, and it has been that way for a long time. Last year's, win against Pierce Johnson, throwing that one pitch, notwithstanding, there's been too few of those and too many of the others, by the way. And I'll tell you a funny story about the Braves as well. I saw them in the World Series in '95 in Cleveland. But this Mets team is well constructed. I think the guy that's come in, and David Stearns, is the kind of executive that maybe all teams should have now.
Yeah.
Not all teams do, but like, he seems to really understand what's important about building a team and not spending money. I mean, not giving pitchers long-term contracts is a different thing than you see a lot of places, today. And it's proven to be correct. And the Mets started out the season with the pitching far outperforming anybody's wildest expectations, including my own. And the hitting was actually not where Met fans expected it to be. And I was asked on my friend Kelly Franco's podcast, The Three Inning Fan, do you think that's going to change? And I said, yes. That's it. Yes.
That was
Yes. the hitting's going to get better and the
Yeah.
pitching's going to get worse. And I think since that time that we had that podcast, it happened way too fast. That's exactly what's happened.
You didn't mean right then.
No, not right now. So I think it's touch and go for the Mets in terms of, you've got pitchers on the shelf that you're hoping to get back, and Frankie Montas, who hasn't pitched a game for the Mets,
Right.
getting shelled in his minor league starts, not encouraging. Manaya is taking a long time to get back in there, and we know how good he was last year until he ran out of gas at the very end because he'd never thrown that many innings to speak of. So I'm concerned in that respect for the Mets, and certainly think that a deal at the trading deadline, because I think they're going to certainly be in it all season long. And I've gone on record, and I'd be interested in your take as a Braves fan. I know your partner's a Phillies guy. I said that the Phillies, I feel like they're aging out right before our eyes. That
Yeah.
that's an older team, and they're holding it together right now. But I don't know if they can manage the entire season this way. Harper's older, but he's great. Castellanos is older. Wheeler is older. All these guys, Nola is older. To think that they're all going to remain healthy and strong and as good as they are right now, that's a lot to expect. So far, they've held it together. I have my doubts.
I think it's a great point. I've been on the Phillies bandwagon since the preseason when we did our picks. The Mets, my biggest question was the pitching, and ironically, as you mentioned, the pitching's been really good. The Phillies, to me, this is it. If they're going to win with this group, they better do it this year. And to your point, I'm not sure, and I don't want to jinx anybody, but the fact that Zach Wheeler has stayed as healthy as he stayed, the way he throws the baseball, if he can survive the second half of the season, if Nola's healthy, if Harper comes back healthy, I still like the Phillies as a challenger, say to the Dodgers in a 5-7 game series. I think they've got the pitching, they've got the hitting. But it's a great point you're making because to me, this is it. Like the window closes at the end of this season for the Phillies unless they make moves and kind of renew that roster. Um, on the other hand, the Mets seem like more of an up and coming team. I think the Braves are going to have to make some significant changes also to their roster. So looking ahead, I like the Mets better, but this season I still kind of think the Phillies over 162 are going to win that division. I think the Mets are going to get a wild card. I don't think I'm not just being pessimistic Braves
Mhm.
fan. I don't think the Braves are going to come back and get a wild card. I think there's just too many holes that Double A can't fill in this short amount of time. Although he is one like Stearns that doesn't believe in signing pitchers to long-term contracts. We let Max Fried walk. You see what he's doing with the Yankees, but
Yeah.
you look at it 5 from now. Just like the Freddie Freeman contract, the Vladimir Guerrero contract, those long-term deals that are not going to age well. But that's just baseball now. It seems like let's just sign a guy. The Devers, the Giants just took on Devers' contract. What are your thoughts on that, by the way? With that Devers contract, does that change anything for the Giants or the Red Sox as far as contention immediately? What are your thoughts there?
I think it changed things for the Red Sox for sure, because I picked them actually to edge by the Yankees this year in the AL East, just given all the moves they made in the offseason, and I was not convinced that the Yankees, with Goldschmidt and everybody was going to rekindle and Bellinger was going to be what he used to be. Well, that's been wrong because they have been extremely good, and the Yankees have gotten Ben Rice to give them more than you could have imagined without Giancarlo Stanton being a big part of it. So the Red Sox appear to me, and I don't want to say this, got rid of a cancer, which is a
Yeah,
over strong way to say it. It
sure.
just
Yeah,
wasn't working there, and they knew that, and they said let's just cut bait and get rid of it. Did they get enough of a return for Devers? I'm sure Red Sox fans will tell you no.
right.
And on the Giants side, Buster Posey has cojones, right? Because he
Absolutely.
paid Willie Adames $180 million. He's got he's got Devers there now, so obviously they gave him carte blanche to do what he's got. I don't think the Giants, I don't know why, I don't feel like that's going to give them the edge to have them take out the Dodgers, but then I don't think anybody's taking out the
Mm.
Dodgers.
Agreed.
So
Agreed.
the other thing I wanted to say is what the Mets have done, and maybe if you don't follow the team as closely as we do, they've got the pitching lab, right, which is a lot of talk around the New York thing that they built. The Dodgers had it. The Mets have mirrored it. Other teams are taking the same. Those abilities for teams to continually replenish their systems with players that can contribute is something the Mets did not have before
Right.
Steve Cohen and his Band of Merry Men came in. So I think that all the other teams are going to follow suit, and the Phillies, I assume, are doing it. I mean, Dombrowski's a smart guy. The Braves, I'm sure, are doing it. I just don't know it as well because I don't follow the team day to day to say, yeah, you've got a bunch of guys down there, and then you've got assets that you can trade when you do want to make a move because you've got guys that other people want.
Yeah, pitching's always valuable, right? If you got pitchers, you've got value. The Braves farm system's a little weak right now, but they do seem to find these guys pitching wise that just come not from out of nowhere, but guys that you didn't expect would go to
Schwellenbach
the
would be
top
a great
prospects.
example. I mean,
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. Even Shawver, who was kind of a highly rated prospect, but he still um, until he got injured, was kind of outperforming what we expected from him this year. So, and a guy like Bryce Elder comes in and gives us 5, 6 innings. Now he may get bombed every now and then, but for the most
yeah,
part, he gives you that
he's the Merrill
consistent.
Kelly of the Braves, in my
Absolutely,
opinion.
absolutely. That's a great way to put it. So you look like a young man, Mark, but I'm going to guess that you have vivid memories of 1986.
Well,
So
you could say that.
okay. So as I told you before we started recording, that's the first World Series that I really, as a kid, remember being interested in, understanding what was going on. I was pulling for the Mets because of the National League loyalty. Give me some of your memories of that series and how important that memory is for you. And I assume your son is young enough to where he doesn't remember that. It was
That's
hard to
right.
judge his
That's
age,
right.
but how
That's right.
important would it be for you guys to get to experience that together, seeing the Mets win a World Series?
Well, I'll just take 1 second and say that, I go back to the Mets in 1969 when I was a kid. And if you ever want to, have a kid love baseball and a team forever, have his team win the World Series when he's about 10 years old,
Oh yeah,
because that will finish you for the rest of your life.
right.
And so, right, the Mets won in '86, 3 years before my son was born. So all he's got to do is hear about it. And that team, and I had tickets to the Mets that season, so I went to a lot of games, was so good and so arrogant. And it was unusual for the Mets to be the arrogant team at that time, right? They had basically, been the second banana to the Yankees, except for 1969, nearly the entire time of their history. And that was a little dip for the Yankees in the mid '80s when they weren't quite as good as they were going to be or as good as they were just before that.
Right. Yeah.
So it was fun to own New York, if you will, and have the Mets, be the attention. And a lot of fans from around the country adopted that team, and I'm surprised because just wouldn't think other cities would like New York or the Mets for that matter. So yeah, that whole experience and being at Game 6, which I was there. I went
Wow.
to Game 2 and Game 6 of the World Series, and of course they don't give you the same seats in the playoffs if you don't have a partial plan as you do during the regular season. So we were in the right field upper deck in fair territory. So then to the left of the foul pole down the right field
Yeah.
line.
Yeah.
So anyway, I can see from there, and it's pretty far away. But they're losing it. It's the tenth. It's the 10th inning. They're down 5-3, and the Red Sox are all on the top step of the dugout, ready to run out on the
Yeah.
field.
Absolutely.
And it was just a horrible feeling. And so obviously everybody knows what happened. But for me, when the ball went through Buckner's legs, I was the first person in that area to understand what just happened because they were going to win, right?
Yeah.
And it hadn't happened yet. You still had to run all the way around the bases and get there. And
Right.
I'm
Right.
jumping up and down, going crazy, because they won the game. They won the game. People are like, what's wrong with you? And sure enough, that happened. So that memory will stay with me, obviously, forever.
That's fantastic. Yeah, to be at Game 6. That's when you said that, I was like, man, that's the definition of romantic about baseball. That's fantastic. So, what would it mean for you and your son to get to experience a title together? I got to do it with my son 4 years ago. What would it mean to you guys to be able to watch the Mets take home the title?
Well, poor Gordon in that, as a father, I have done him so wrong because he's a fan of the Knicks, which I am. He's a
Yeah,
fan of the Jets, which, you can't imagine how rough that is. A Long Island guy, I grew up as a
yeah,
Jet fan. And the Islanders I was a fan of. He's not really a hockey fan. So he has never seen a championship for a team that he has rooted for in his lifetime.
wow, wow,
so
wow.
so that's what it would mean. It would mean that he would
Yeah,
have one of his own, and through his pleasure of having that experience, I would be thrilled beyond belief that finally my son got to experience that what you experienced with your son in 2021.
Absolutely. Great stuff. Great memories. All right. I got two more for you. One is we'll transition back to some Hall of Fame talk. Among the current players, Mark, who do you think are slam dunks? We talked about Chris Sale. Who else do you think is an absolute slam dunk for Cooperstown right now?
Kershaw, Scherzer, and Verlander. I don't think anybody's going to contend. Those guys. I also put in, and he hasn't really retired yet. I don't know if that he's an active player, but Zach Greinke, by the way. So
Yeah,
maybe one day Zach, you know what? I feel like pitching again, and so that will push everything back. I don't know if anybody give him a job at
yeah.
this point, but he's
He's a
another
different
guy.
kind of guy. Zach is. Yeah,
Exactly. So I think he's going to do it. I think Joey Votto is going to, be a Hall of Famer, without a doubt. And the obvious ones, we expect, Cabrera to be a first ballot guy and all that. But I think of the current players that are playing right now, it's a little bit more difficult to sort of project that. I think Jose Ramirez is a guy that, I just saw something from one of my writer friends today. He is in the 300 club. 300 homers, 300 stolen bases. Only 8 guys have ever done that, and a
yeah.
lot of them aren't in the Hall of Fame because their names are Barry Bonds and Alex Rodriguez and things of that nature.
Right.
And I think when we talk about metrics, that's a pretty good one.
It
That's
is.
it's a pretty unique territory to be in.
It is. For the naysayers, too, most of his stolen bases would have come before the bases increased in size and the new base running rules, which that's another thing a lot of people want to remove some of the accomplishments because of those things. But to our point earlier, I think you have to look at it in different eras. The game is a little different. The basics of the game always stay the same, right? The pitcher versus batter, you got to hit the ball. But in the different eras, there's obviously been different rules and the way the game was played has changed. I think if you take all that into account, you don't discount like what Shohei did, or what Ronald Acuna Jr. did with the stolen bases, but you do have to take that into account when you look back at the full picture, understandably. But to your point, Ramirez is a guy that's constantly overlooked and underrated. So I'm very interested once his career is over. Will he be a first ballot guy? Will he be a second or third ballot guy? Another one that I think is building a first ballot case. I want to get your opinion here. Is Freddie Freeman? Is he already there, or is
Yep.
he still building
I,
that
I
first
wrote a,
ballot?
I wrote on my Almost Cooperstown, so I wrote a thing about is he already a Hall of Famer, and
Yeah,
then went on to said yes, he's already
yeah,
a Hall of
yeah,
Famer. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
How
Might
much?
might be the best situational, big time situational hitter
Um,
out there right now. I mean, Juan Soto actually is really good, even with a rough
he is.
start this year. He's a guy that yeah, that the players said the guy they least want to face the pitchers when in a big situation is Juan Soto.
Oh yeah, definitely. Yeah, yeah. Freddie, I think the iconic World Series moment certainly helps him from last year. He already had a World Series before that. Soto's a good point. I'm going to add one more question because I got one to leave you on that every baseball fan has to answer. But before that, what are your thoughts on Soto as a Mets fan? First year with Soto, he can be. I think the perception of Juan is that he's a little arrogant among fans. He's changed teams quite a bit. What are your thoughts having Juan now for half a season? As a Mets fan, what are your thoughts on Juan Soto?
I think look, everybody knew that he was going to get that payday eventually. So that's why he got pushed around so much to different places until he found the team
Yeah,
that was willing to give him what he thought he wanted. And when you are, preternatural in his way and so good so young and have so much runway ahead of you,
yeah,
for the rest of your career, I think that it's easy to see why a team like the Mets would go out and give him what would be an ungodly amount of money for any human to do anything,
yeah,
much less
true.
it being baseball. And I think Soto, even this year, my impressions as a Met fan is, he's he's not as bad in right field as I thought he was going to be. But
Right.
I think it's like, oh, he actually can go get it. He's got a pretty good arm. He looks disinterested sometimes out there, but I just think that's his vibe.
Yeah,
And he is, I think, second to Aaron Judge. We're going to talk about this on our podcast, in the category of hard hit balls, that his expected OBA would be a lot higher if this compared to other players. So he's
yeah,
hitting the ball hard. He's kind of hitting it right at people. He's not having a good year, and at the end of the year, I think we'd be surprised if he didn't hit 280, 290, and hit 30 to 40 home runs and drove in 100 and was a situational, stud, if you will.
yeah. No, I think that's a good point. And Aaron Judge takes a lot of crap about his postseason performances, and I guess that's justified in some sense. Soto's been there before, and he's performed in the postseason. So when the Mets get to the postseason, I feel like he can have a lot of confidence that having Soto there, maybe even ahead of a guy like Judge who struggled in the postseason. Fair or not, I mean, it's a small sample size, but fair or not, I would feel more comfortable with Soto at the plate in the postseason, having proven himself in the past. So,
Jason, when we look at Hall of Famers, we look at their postseason contribution, and what my son and I always say is, if you have a really good postseason career, that helps you in your case. If you don't, it doesn't hurt you. We're
it
not
should.
gonna we're not gonna ding you for 70 at bats in postseason in your whole career, where you hit 220 when you're normally a 300 hitter. That's
Yeah.
not enough of a sample for us to go, oh, you choked against the best. That's got nothing to do with it. Judge isn't choking. No, nobody's doing that. Winfield was thought of as being, remember when Steinbrenner called him Mr. May, you
That's
know,
right. Yeah.
and A-Rod,
Yeah.
except for the 2009 World Series, was, consistently not a great postseason performer. So,
Yeah.
they had their moments at least to sort of arrest that a little bit, both of them.
Well, sports has definitely, whether it's media driven or fan driven, created a narrative that if you don't win a championship, somehow, Dan Marino was one of my favorite
Yeah,
NFL players as a kid, but two great baseball examples, Tony Gwynn and Ted Williams, didn't get to do much in the postseason period, but two of the greatest hitters of all time. I'm not judging them on, a team accomplishment, but that seems
right.
to be the culture now. All right, Mark, this has been great. We're gonna have to do this again because this is the best baseball talk I've had in a while. This is fantastic stuff. But I got to get you out on a question that every baseball fan has to answer. What is your favorite baseball movie?
You asked Xavier that. I will go against. I love Bull Durham, and I love Major League, as X talked about. I talk about a movie, and I did a podcast where we had a few people come and talk about, if you're locked up and you can't watch baseball, you can't watch a live game, what are your baseball Hall of Fame movies? And everybody kind of put in their thing. So I chose a little known movie from 1994. I think it is called The Scout,
Mhm.
and that's with Albert Brooks and Brendan Fraser. And I love that movie for so many reasons, only because it kind of pokes fun at baseball. I'm a giant Albert Brooks fan and a Brendan
Yeah,
Fraser fan for
yeah,
that matter. And the high point in the movie comes for me, like Brendan Fraser is just sort of this, savant who can play baseball and can't do anything else in his entire life. He's basically
right.
virtually, unable to be a human. And so at one point, he's about to go pitch for the Yankees at the end of the movie. I won't spill the beans here. And Albert Brooks says, "Well, I'm just a guy making 15%." And Brendan Fraser says, "I thought it was 10." And it's the most lucid thing that he says in the entire movie.
Yeah,
But it
yeah.
really told you a lot about baseball and the way that people, look at things. So I recommend that highly if you want to laugh and a really good baseball
That's a
movie.
great pick. That was a great pick because I've seen that movie, but it's been a long time. I need to go back and revisit it. But that's a great pick because you didn't pick one of the normal ones, right? Major League and Field of Dreams is probably my favorite. But yeah, that's awesome, man. That's good stuff. Mark, I cannot thank you enough for doing this. This has been fantastic. Love kicking around some baseball with another baseball romantic. And so we'll have you back if you'd like. We'll definitely
Anytime,
have
Jason.
another
Love
episode,
talking
man.
to you, and maybe we'll reciprocate. We'll have you guys, and we'll do a
Yeah,
joint one sometime. That could be really fun. So
absolutely. And we'll have Gordon on too if he's available and tell
he'd
him I
love
said
to.
hi.
He'd love to. Yeah, he's got a lot to say.
Awesome stuff. Great to meet you, Mark. Thank you for your time, man.
Thank you, Jason. It was my pleasure.
All right.